What will Ukraine's security guarantees look like? Why does the freezing of Russian assets trigger Putin? And what about the successful hunt for a Varshavyanka submarine? We're talking about this with military expert AFU Colonel Petro Chernyk. Petro, hello. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Let's start with the Berlin negotiations. After the meeting in Germany, the negotiators from Ukraine and the USA, as well as EU leaders, said, I quote, that there was real progress. One of the key elements is about providing Ukraine with guarantees, legally written security guarantees. And the United States is ready to push these commitments even through Congress. Do the messages about real concrete progress in the talks truly mean we're getting closer to ending the war, or is it just diplomatic restraint in statements? Let's break this question into several parts because there really is something that didn't exist before. But first of all, let's understand where we are. We've discussed this before, but it's worth reiterating. Indeed, in terms of the economy, the Russian Federation is likely to suffer, I wouldn't say an absolute collapse, but a very serious blow. And they understand this very well. Indeed, the Muscovites concluded they need to move towards some kind of finale. That is why this process is so relevant. What is the novelty of this particular Berlin case? The fact that this took place on a platform in Europe is a very big step forward in terms of strengthening Europe's role in supporting us. And there is indeed another, in my opinion, rather strange maneuver. What does it consist of? We analyze it in detail. We understand very well that we will not sign any document with the Muscovites. In my opinion, the most likely thing will be the grain and legume agreement that we first signed with Turkey, and the UN was present there too, and then they signed with the Russians. It worked. Therefore, there will most likely be a triangle. We, the USA, and Russia. But what does the Berlin case have to do with it? It's because the Europeans have emerged as a powerful battering ram, as a powerful lobbyist. This puts enormous pressure on Trump, that we exist, that you cannot ignore such a giant. And this giant has a population of more than 500 million people, and if you add up the two GDPs, the American and European, it is almost $50 trillion. And we split it roughly in half in Europe's favor. You said lobbyist of interests. Whose interests? Ours. We finally have such a consolidated position that it will not be possible to ignore it across the ocean. And one more detail about Congress that you mentioned. I think this is a very interesting maneuver. What is it about? If this is actually implemented by the Congress, and the Congress votes, both the lower house and the upper house, and it becomes law, then Trump will have no maneuver, because there are so many people throwing stones at him, saying that he is Agent Krasnov and so on. He's not letting the Russians lose. He will have to act because one thing is to operate within presidential powers, and quite another when a document appears. But there are certain threats here. First, it may not pass through Congress. And we remember that the Russians can change the rules of the game at the last moment, at the last second. However, strategically, the situation is indeed approaching a tipping point. This is probably the first time I'll be engaged in the thankless task of predicting specifics. In my opinion, something should have appeared by January or February. The question is what it will be. In general, negotiations can be very long. However, if you reduce everything to a rough common denominator, there has never been such a high tone of the negotiation process and such European consolidation around Ukraine. Moreover, I have to say this because it is very important. Historical contexts matter a lot. If we do not know history, we will not have our own future. And since the times of the 20th century, the struggle for our independence, where we had at least 5 enemies, and also 3 of our own states that fought each other in internal conflict, there has never been such consolidation, such subjectivization around us. We truly remain number 1 on the global geopolitical radar. It is very important that this process really finalizes in our favor. And once again, I will give you a very correct pass. We remember that our negotiating power is based on only one factor, the resilience of our soldiers on the front line. Petro, can these guarantees work without the direct involvement of the United States and NATO? NATO and the United States, what is it together? My personal position is that if you look closely at how this organization was formed, right after the Second World War, let me remind you that it was formed precisely to confront Moscow imperialism, and I will once again make this point to the audience and the media. We are now fulfilling the function of this phenomenon. 80% of it is still the USA, no matter how you turn it. Do the Americans have the instruments? They have plenty, if only they wanted and chose to. American troops are present in South Korea and in Japan. And you could list examples for a long time, not to mention a huge giant contingent. We discussed the Ramstein air base with this audience. Remember how last spring people said the Americans would leave by autumn, leave NATO, leave Europe, and not a single American soldier has left the European continent. And the aviation wing has strengthened in the form of F-22 directly on Polish territory. This is a very serious signal, because there is no better airplane than the king of the air. The question is how it will be realized in life. So far, we have no idea what it will look like, but we understand that this is the first step. Since they are talking about it, maybe the moment will come when we will breathe a sigh of relief. Last time we discussed it, and I declared my own position that the best thing is a large contingent of the US Army on the territory of Ukraine. However, against the backdrop of this Euro-optimism, Moscow is once again making statements that they are ready to continue the war next year, and President Zelensky called on Western partners to pay attention to these statements. Let's listen to the direct speech. Today we heard another signal from Moscow that they are preparing next year to be a year of war. And these are signals not only for us. We need real protection from this Russian history of madness. And now we will continue to work with all partners to ensure that we do have such protection. We need security solutions. We need financial solutions, in particular for Russian assets. We need political decisions. And we need the courage of all our partners to see the truth, recognize the truth, and act accordingly. Given the signals that are coming out of Moscow, they have previously said that they reject 8 points of this peace plan. What should we do next? Let's find out what they reject. The Muscovites are truly squealing and screaming, and this is very serious. They realize that part of their considerable money may be spent on the reconstruction of Ukraine, and that is a global defeat for them, even in propaganda terms. They started the war, in 3 days they would reach Kyiv, eliminate Ukrainian statehood, Nazism, and so on. The money was frozen, and now it can also be taken away. Is that a blow to them, and especially personally to Putin? And what will happen in reality? And their reaction is absolutely expected, by the way, and what they will come to, only time can answer, because money is such a delicate matter where many players are involved. Why is Belgium so cautious? Because they have their main assets there, and Italy has already supported them in this. Because if someone thinks that these are cases stuffed with dollars, that's not the case at all. This is a unique phenomenon of capitalism called securities. That is, a whole range of production processes, including social ones, are tied to it. And everything is very tightly intertwined inside. They're really afraid, but it's a very serious historical moment. If this really happens, then in modern history, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union, because then, in my view, capitalism finally won as a phenomenon, and Francis Fukuyama believed that the liberal world order, especially in economics, really had won, though that's far from true, then this is a very big and very serious precedent. Now the EU summit is taking place where this issue is being considered. And there is already first information that the European Union is ready to allocate 90 billion euros over the next 2 years to support Ukraine, but from its own assets. It is very good that you mentioned these 90 billion, but I will update you. They have already been allocated, and we wait for them to be provided. But let's look at this number and remember others, because again, I repeat myself, it's not enough. And what is a lot? Let's do comparisons with historical examples, because that's best. On March 11, 1941, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and America had not entered the war yet, because Pearl Harbor happened only on December 7 that same year, signed the so-called Lend-Lease, meaning financial assistance to allies to fight Nazism. $50 billion at that time. Today, if you recalculate for indexation, inflation, that's $690 million. By the way, Great Britain alone consumed up to $34 billion, the Soviet Union received, and Russia paid it back in the 2000s. This is about how our experts pressure us. We're in debt, our grandchildren will repay for it. Let them repay it even for 100 years, as long as we break away from the Muscovites. By the way, this loan will be indefinite. That's great. Let's go back, 690 by today's indicators. But what was the scale of World War II? What was its scale? As of this moment, we have already received at least $300 billion in assistance. The USA remains the largest donor. The European Union remains the second largest donor as a structure, but there is also so-called assistance from partner countries. The Germans alone have already contributed more than 20 billion euros. The British have contributed more than 18 billion euros. And some countries like Denmark, like Estonia, like Norway, if you count the amount of money they contribute as a percentage of GDP, it is money of an incommensurable order. This is very important and we need to realize it. But I must correctly carry one more detail through the media sphere. This is my personal position, and I do not claim to be in any way true. History knows cases where there was no money. The Ukrainian insurgent army had no state, no money, and no allies. This is very important, and we fought until the 60s. The last battle was in 1960, and I have another example, the cemetery of the empire. It's called Afghanistan. Back in the 19th century, the British army died there. Closer to us is the Soviet Union that fought the Mujahideen. The Americans gave weapons to the Mujahideen through Pakistan. But when the Americans came to Afghanistan, what did the Taliban have? Small arms, explosives, but the most important thing was missing: resistance. That's why the words are often attributed to Napoleon, but in fact it was Raimondo Montecuccoli, an Austrian field marshal from the era of the religious wars. He said, "Money, money, and money again." We are talking about war, and no one on the planet Earth has ever been pumped like we were. It was believed that in 1972 Israel was very heavily pumped up for the so-called Yom Kippur War, when an Arab coalition pushed back into Sinai, because after the results of the Six-Day War in 67 Israel had taken it. So in those amount, if we add it up again, it's a major first Lend-Lease. We're definitely going beyond 2/3. And let's be honest and straightforward. Has anyone ever supported us like this before? Therefore, we need to stop this hype about the money being too little. There is more than enough money. But how if we are honest and frank and refer to our GDP in 2021, which was the benchmark, the largest, the best, almost 200 billion, then the aid has already exceeded GDP by 1.5 times. And the latest news about the 90 billion indicates only one thing: no one will leave us without money. And if you put all the factors together, not being an optimist by nature, I have a strategic vision of understanding that in this historical cycle, we have a unique chance to finally break away from this bad, poisonous bear. By the way, Trump has signed the defense budget for the United States, and $400 million is also allocated for us for the next year. Of course, someone has thrown a stone at us. It used to be 60 and now it's 400, but every single dollar matters, because with those 400 million, Some amount of the weapons we need will be purchased, and of course 155mm artillery ammunition. So the cost of a shell at the start of the war was about $1,000, now it's $8,000. But they are also allocating money for us for the 27th. In general, since we're talking about the American military budget, next year is the largest budget since the Second World War, not even during the Soviet Union. And the next one, I have no doubt that they will break through the $1 trillion mark. There is a lot of speculation. The Chinese cannot reach 300. They can't. And for the Russians, there is a question of how to count the ruble and what to tie it to. No matter what anyone says, they still haven't put their wartime economy fully onto a war footing and set it on rails. If they truly had, the way it was during World War II, they would have built at least one new Tu-95MS and shown it off. Forget the Tu, that's the 60s. The newest Tu-160, the praised White Swan, show that you can build it, roll it out of the hangar, and get it into the air at least for test flights. I would like to discuss one more topic with you. After the successful Operation Spiderweb, the security service conducted a unique operation in the Black Sea. A marine drone attacked the Russian submarine Varshavyanka. It was in Novorossiysk, in the military harbor. What makes this submarine unique? Because as far as I know, it carries caliber missiles. Yes, it does. But let's take it in order of historical issues. This operation can turn the logic of submarines in general upside down, but to understand this, we need to go through it in order. First of all, we have to take off our hats to the organizers. This is the fourth, in my opinion, brilliant Ukrainian operation in combat. The first, we remind you, is the sinking of the cruiser Moskva. We have no doubt that it can be put in the same historical line as such events as the sinking of the battleship Tirpitz, or the heaviest, largest battleship ever built, the Japanese battleship Yamato. Someone will say to me now, not the only one in history after the Second World War, there was a sinking during the Falklands War. I agree, but there were other geopolitical stakes and slightly different historical parameters. Next, the Operation Spiderweb itself is the third. A Storm Shadow missile flew into a dry dock and destroyed one Varshavyanka, and now the fourth. But what makes this operation different from all the others? Now I go back to the point you made about the performance characteristics because you need to know and understand them. Varshavyanka is a diesel-electric submarine. What is diesel-electric? It has fuel, it surfaces and runs on diesel engines, moves, charges batteries, dives, fights. It can carry up to 4 3M14 caliber missiles in a special modification, although in fact the caliber is nothing but a bad copy of a Tomahawk. It's a vicious machine. Why? Because it is launched at a depth of up to 50 meters. It is almost impossible to catch it there without a full-fledged submarine fleet. They used it really seriously. The Black Sea is huge, more than 430,000 square kilometers. That's bigger than Germany. Working depths are also very large because the deepest point is over 2 kilometers. Of course, no one works at these depths, but the sea is also unique in its composition. There is an interesting layer where submarines are hiding, so it is very difficult to catch them at sea, but they were caught in the Novorossiysk base. There are moments of genius here. They are not people, they are not human. They had 2 years after they withdrew their fleet, because we hit Varshavyanka in 23, and a large landing ship was lost there. They realized that it could not be here. The best that can be found in Crimea on the Black Sea was taken to Novorossiysk, but they failed to build a defense system. What did they do the other day? They blocked it with barges and are spinning it in propaganda as some kind of fierce defense. This reminds me of the Crimean War of 1853-56, when ships were also sunk there. Now, in order for them to leave the harbor promptly, they need to pull these barges away, and it is not a given that there will be no one waiting for them when they get out. This means the right technological structure. And what is the right technological structure? They had to fence it off with special buoys that respond to movement of the submersible. Sea Baby is small. It has an electric motor, but the motor spins. This is how acoustics are constructed. When the propeller shaft is running, it makes a certain sound, and since the submarine fleet appeared, people have worked out how to hear it. Not only in the submarine itself, but there is a whole system of buoys. There is no such system of buoys. This means that they went to a primitive way of protecting their, I'd say, decent machine, because after all, even the Chinese and Vietnamese bought this machine. I remind you, it's not only caliber, it also has 6 533 mm torpedo tubes, giving it a real capability to engage peer submarines and sink ships. And here is another nuance. There is a perception that boats of this class will definitely be written off. No, they won't. They will not be written off because they can still perform this torpedoing function and also mine. There is at least one confirmed fact that the mines included in its ammunition were placed along our grain and legume corridor. We understand that only a submarine could do this. For how long can this special operation keep Russian ships anchored in harbor? That's a great question. We have analyzed the Varshavyanka itself, why it's a unique operation, why it's harmful, and most likely they will not use them so massively anymore, but it takes out 2 submarines. It's very difficult to verify accurate information. I'm a person who likes verified information. We go by the principle of the highest declared figure. It was declared there are 6, so 4 remain. There may be a raid method. What is a raid? We went to the bay for the night or for a few days, rested, recharged, and went to set up. The autonomy is about 40 days. That's a lot. So those 4 submarines are most likely still operational. Let's move away from the Varshavyanka a little bit and look in the other direction. The 3 M14 caliber is not only Varshavyanka. They also have an entire family, and I emphasize the family. First of all, small missile ships of the Buyan M and Karakurt type. By the way, these are some of the newest ones, built relatively recently. They have a small displacement, up to 800 tons. There is also such a phenomenon as the Volgodonsk Basin. The Azov Sea is connected to the Caspian Sea through a river and a number of canals. But there is a very interesting detail. Our drones flew to the Caspian Sea to oil platforms. That's important, meaning we have already felt out the routes there. And for now, I don't think we will reach them there truly today. But if we reached a platform, if drones found a route, then they will also find where the ships are, because they must reload, must change fuel, must change fresh water, must sooner or later service the engines. And they actually have a very big problem with engines there. So we will find that too. And now the most important thing, if you add everything together, plus I think about 2 frigates of the Burevestnik type, still operational with 16 launch cells, and you add it all up, in my personal view they still have up to about 12.5 operational machines.